Good afternoon, everyone. Just checking volume. Good afternoon. Welcome along to our first census data seminar. This is our first one around the country, so it's really exciting to be able to bring it down here to Victoria, here to Melbourne, to kick us off today. We've got a few people still to turn up, so we might see people sort of flow in through the doors as we go along, but that's all well and good. My name's Duncan Young. I'm the 2016 Census Program Manager, and so it's a great pleasure that I'm here to present on the census results today, and I'll be tag teaming through the session with a colleague of mine, Sue Taylor, who's the Director of Census Data. And so between the two of us, we'll be giving you some insights of what we can see from a 2016 census data and what some of the key stories are that stand out to us from the data. But before we get into the seminar, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and acknowledge any members of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community who are here with us today in this room or are tuned into our webcast. So this session is going out live by our webcast. So when you ask questions later on, that's your chance for your moment in the sun and to be heard across a webcast around the world. So we might no worries at all, just to come in. And back in 1911, Australia had its first census, and just over a kilometre from here, about 1.2 kilometres away to the southeast, from a Royal Exhibition building, we actually processed Australia's first census. Now, our history as a nation, our young history as a nation, we've actually only had 17 censuses. So it's actually quite a rare occasion for us to get to a point of being able to release and share the census data. And that's what we're going to step into today. But census data is more than just data, it's more than just numbers. The census has always been a cornerstone of the democracy of Australia. So the census data is used for setting of electoral boundaries. Census data is used for setting the number of electoral seats in Parliament and across each state and territory. It's used in order to allow us to know where to distribute government funding, in particular goods and services tax are distributed across the country based on population estimates built from a census. But the census is critical to government planning, administration, policy development. So some of those big decisions about where do you put schools, where do you put roads, where do you put hospitals, all of those things are built around us understanding who our population is and where they live. The census is also critical to all of the other statistics produced by the ABS. So the ABS publishes some 500 publications a year, and whether it's economic statistics and business statistics or social statistics, all of those are built around the basis that the census provides. But probably uniquely for the ABS with the census is a data set which is very heavily used right across our communities, our businesses, and by researchers. And so it's one of the reasons why we're doing these data seminars is the census data was provided by you and we're returning it to you through this series of seminars. So since some 11 months or so ago, you all completed your census forms to either on a household form, so some 8.5 million households completed household census forms and 750,000 people were counted through personal household forms. We've been busy turning that information on forms into statistics. So we've had over 700 coding and processing staff. A large number of our staff are actually based not too far from here down in Dandenong, where we had a secure paper data capture centre to scan in the paper forms which arrived. So there was some 3.5 million paper forms arrived into our centre there, and they were scanned in and the writing recognised. And I can tell you that the doctors aren't the only people in Australia with messy handwriting, where we had quite a bit of fun trying to translate some people's handwriting, but translated we have done to turn it into a beautiful statistics we're going to share today. And our computer systems have been pretty busy. They've pumped through 5.3 billion data transactions in order, as part of it, the transformation of that information. There's been some 23 million clerical operations conducted by our 700 staff, and it's produced some 68.9 million pieces of data that we've compiled for you into a nice 2.8 million tables of information. So we're not going to cover all of it today. My team tells me that if we covered it all today, if we just allowed each piece of data 1 second in the sun, we'd be here for 2 years without sleep just to get through it all. So we're just going to have to keep to some of the highlights today. But as you'll get the sense, I get pretty excited about census data. So I hope you're in a comfy seat and ready for this session. So, what was the quality of the census data from 2016? Well, overall, we had a 95.1% end response rate. And so this is very comparable to what we've seen in previous censuses in Australia, and very comparable to what we see in New Zealand, UK and other censuses. So very high level of participation rate. I don't know who in this room's run a survey before. If you got a 95% response rate from your survey, you'd be pretty rapt with the response you've got. One of the unique characteristics of this census was the high degree of participation online. So we ended up with 63.2% of persons choosing to contribute online. But it's a little bit lower than our target of 65%, but it has provided us with some great dividends when it comes to the quality of the data. So what we see when people fill out the census form online is that they actually fill it out more comprehensively than paper forms. The online form helps them go to the right question. It helps them provide some context for a question, so uses people's names to help them understand what relationship we're talking about or what occupation we need, and actually has some prompting questions which helps people to make sure that they've given us enough pieces of information. So for example, if we ask someone what their occupation was and they told us that they worked as a nurse, we'd ask a follow-up question which would ask them to indicate which kind of nurse they were, which is really great for the detail of the data that we can produce. One of the other critical measures of a census is how well does it represent what we estimate was actually the full population in Australia on census night. And what we found was that this census had a 1.0% net undercount. So that's working out how many people we missed in the census, how many people filled out a census form twice. I was crunching all those numbers and to work out how much does the census underrepresent the population. So underrepresenting the population by 1% and as a net undercount is a very low figure and much lower than what we've seen previously. So, but when it comes to quality, we're not asking you just to take our own word for it. One of the things that we did this census was we assembled an independent assessment panel for the census, an independent assurance panel, which had a number of esteemed Australians on it, including a gentleman from University of Melbourne here, Professor Peter McDonald, one of Australia's best demographers, as well as a number of other Australians who got together and stepped through an analysis of the data in order to come up and give us what they have done, which is a proverbial big tick that the census data quality in 2016 is good to go. So what did the data tell us about Australia? Well, firstly, in the census, we counted 23,401,892 usual residents in Australia on census night. So what does this number include? What doesn't it include? Well, it doesn't include overseas visitors. So we also counted over 300,000 people who are visiting Australia on census night. I don't think many of them came for census night, but I'm sure some of them came down to check out how it was going. And it doesn't count that there's some 600,000 Australians who are overseas on census night, so off somewhere else in the world at that time. But what we do when we create the estimates of the resident population of Australia is we actually add back in all those people. So we get information from, and when you fill out those forms at the airport or when you go through your passport control, and that allows us to estimate the complete residents population of Australia, not just for people who happen to be here on census night. So 23.4 million is an 8.8% growth over the last 5 years. So quite a significant healthy growth over population across the country. But population's doubled since 1966 and increased some fourfold since 1921. And the increase over the last 5 years is a little bit faster than what we've seen over the history of Australia. So we're in a stage of relatively high growth at the moment. Where does our population in Australia live? Well, close to a third of our population lives in New South Wales. It's our largest state, with nearly 7.5 million people, but followed not too far behind by beautiful Victoria with 5.9 million people. Some 80% of our population now live in our three eastern mainland states or the ACT. So very much we're tilted towards the east of Australia at the moment. The growth rates are different though, state by state. So South Australia and Tassie, let's call them Australia's best kept secrets. So the growth rate in Tassie is only of 3% over the last 5 years, while South Australia saw a growth of only 5%. We saw faster growth in New South Wales, Queensland and Northern Territory, all between 8 and 9%. And so just a little bit below the national growth rate, but quite strong growth there. So it came down to a race of three for the fastest growing state and territory over the last 5 years. Western Australia started strongly, but slowed off a little bit and ended up with 10.5%. And so then it actually came down to Victoria and ACT, with Victoria ending up in second place with 10.7% and ACT seeing an 11.2% growth in census counts over the last 5 years. Now, whilst we've got all these beautiful towns across Australia, all of your Wollongambis and your Walla Wallas and your Wagga Waggas and your Wollongongs, the vast majority of Australians don't live in any of those cool sounding places, but they actually live in our capital cities. So what this census found was that right on 2/3, just a tiny nick under 2/3 of Australia's population are now living in one of our capital cities across the country. And our capital cities grew by 10.5% over the last 5 years, compared to only 5.7% outside the capital cities. So like probably most of us in the room here, we've chosen capital cities as our place to call home. One of the factors when you look at it that is driving our growth of capital cities is our migration. So if you look over the last 25 years is migration into Australia, the people who have arrived in the last 25 years, some 86% of them now call a capital city home. So certainly that's a big contributor to that growth. Now in Victoria, it's actually more than 3/4 of the population call Melbourne home. So very much as a state, you'd be pretty, if someone says they're from Victoria, you're on confident grounds if you say you're probably from Melbourne. But our growth rate from capital cities is somewhat different to our state-by-state capital or territory growth. And so Melbourne's growing faster than Sydney. I'll touch on that in a minute, but Melbourne's not our fastest growing capital city. We actually saw Perth grow faster over the last few years, but Darwin was our fastest growing capital city with some 13.5% growth over the last 5 years. So the age-old Melbourne and Sydney story. I'm presenting in Sydney tomorrow. I'm going to have to change this story because they might not let me leave the room. But so while Sydney is our largest capital city in the country with 4.8 million people counted on census night, over the last 5 years it's been growing at 1,656 people per week, which is well below. Here in Melbourne, you've been growing by 1,859 new people calling Melbourne home every week since the last census. And so, as you can see from those lines, there was a little period there around the 2000 Sydney Olympics where Sydney got a little bit ahead of Melbourne. But ever since Melbourne's been gaining ground. And certainly we'll be releasing some population projections later this year, which will come up with a new figure of when Melbourne will catch Sydney. So obviously still some time to go, but an interesting race there. So let's step onto a population pyramid. Forgive my excitement, but I love population pyramids. They're a statistician's favourite thing. So what a population pyramid shows is the proportion of a population which are at each different age groups. So in this picture, we've got 5-year age groups from 0 to 4-year-olds at the bottom and 95-plus-year-olds at the top of that chart, and we've got females on the left and males on the right of the chart here. And so this is a picture from 1991. So back when Boris Becker won the Australian Open, back when Paul Keating became Prime Minister, this is a picture of Australia at that point in time. And what you can see here is that there's this really solid block from 40 to 44 down. They're all the popular age groups are in the 40 to 44 or younger age groups in the population. And we still have what's largely sort of a pyramid kind of shape on top there. So fast forward 25 years, Boris Becker's not playing as good at tennis anymore, and this is the picture we've now got of Australia in 2016. So Australia in 2016's appeared in the blue here, and you can see there's a bit of a chunk which has come out of the proportion of a population at younger ages, and that's been added into the proportion of a population at sort of those older ages through to 65 to 69. So what we have Australia is a bit of a middle-age spread here. It's a bit of an ageing population represented in this picture. And so what we saw in this census is that now 1 in every 6 people in Australia are over the age of 65. And if you look at Tasmania is our oldest state. It has 1 in every 5 people in the population of Tasmania now is over the age of 65. What we can see, if you look right up at the 85 plus, as they look like small lines there, but that has had huge growth over the last 5 years. There's now some 486,842 Australians over the age of 85. That's basically the population of Tasmania. It's not actually the population of Tasmania, but the equivalent size to the population of Tasmania. So what we can see here is this sort of significant shift over a period of time. So if we look at closer to home here, we've got a profile here of Melbourne in orange and the rest of Victoria in blue. And what you actually see, the rest of state in blue, is actually an older profile than Australia as a whole. And it's actually stepping, I used the word pyramid before, demographers use that to describe that at first shape, middle-age spread they talk about. Then they actually talk about the coffin, where it's actually wider at the top and skinnier at the bottom. And that's actually what we're now seeing in the rest of the state of Victoria outside of a capital city, is the move to a coffin shape, with the largest groups now being in that sort of 60 to 69-year-old age span. What you can see in the Melbourne picture isn't a pyramid shape. There's not a huge growth in fertility. What you can see there is a huge growth in migration. So people coming in from overseas, but also from interstate, in those kind of 20 to 24 to 35 to 39-year-olds. So that wider orange section down the bottom that's the biggest age groups now across Victoria. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population of Australia has grown by over 18% in the last 5 years to some 649,171 people, or some 2.8% of the Australian population. This growth hasn't been evenly distributed across the country. In fact, nearly all of this growth has occurred in the east or the southeast of Australia, with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population of the Northern Territory only growing by 3% over the last 5 years, whereas the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population in Victoria has grown by 26% over the last 5 years. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population of New South Wales has grown by some 25% over the last 5 years. So certainly some interesting shifts there in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population. Back to my favourite age pyramids, this is quite a different picture that we can see when we look at the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population compared to the non-Indigenous population of Australia. So the non-Indigenous picture you've largely seen before, so it's the middle-aged spread picture of Australia. What we can see in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander picture is very much a pyramid shape, which is the shape of a high growth population. It's a shape of a population with high fertility, but it's also over shape of a population with lower life expectancy, which causes it to come together more sharply as you go into the older years. But the median age of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia has increased from 21 in 2011 through to 23 in 2016, but that's significantly below the 38 for the non-Indigenous population of Australia. And so some half the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population of Australia, so half of that 648,000 people are under the age of 25 as counted in the census. So the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population are largely in New South Wales and Queensland. So some 62% of Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are in one of those two states, represented by that column on the left of your screen up there. But as a proportion of a state, they have the highest proportion of a Northern Territory population. So over a quarter of a Northern Territory population have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander origin, and Victoria actually has the lowest proportion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders of any state and territory across the country. Across the country, whilst I mentioned earlier that 2/3 of the Australian population live in capital cities, only a third of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders live in capital cities across the country, so a lot more likely to choose to live outside the capital cities. So in Victoria, the population, as I mentioned, increased by 26% over the last 5 years to 47,778. And more than half of the population of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Victoria are called Melbourne home, which was a 33% increase of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Melbourne. Then outside of Melbourne, the most popular areas for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are across in the Latrobe Gippsland area, so across to the right of the screen there with over 4,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and there's nearly 4,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, some 3,995 up in Swan Hill, Majura, up in the northwest of the state. So now I'm going to hand over to Sue Taylor to tell us a little bit about the cultural and linguistic diversity of Australia.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're getting some of the enthusiasm that we're feeling about these statistics. I'll just say that 2 weeks ago when we released the census data, there are a lot of very happy nerds in Canberra after working long and hard at processing the data, collecting it, etc. To see the release just over 2 weeks ago was absolutely fantastic. And it just gets more exciting because once you actually start looking at the stories that the data tells you about Australia, Australians and how we're changing, it's just really, really fascinating. So this next section is really illustrating how diverse Australia has become and really looking at the change over a number of years, but focusing as well over recent changes as well. So this large diagram here on the left, the large circle, basically shows you what we're calling first generation Australians and the contribution they make to the Australian population. First generation are people who are born overseas and then move here, so like me. The second generation Australians are people who were born in Australia, but they had at least one parent born overseas, so there is a bit of an overseas connection there. And the large green portion of the circle represents people who were born here and whose parents were born here. So in 2016, we're approaching a bit of a tipping point in terms of the contribution of first and second generation Australians to the Australian population. And it's only slightly over half our third generation. But when you have a look at what's going on in the capital cities, you can see they make a much bigger contribution. And for Sydney, 39% of the population in Sydney are actually first generation migrants. In Melbourne, it's slightly lower, but it's still much bigger than the Australian average. So 36% are first generation migrants, so they were born first generation Australian, so they were born overseas and they've now come to live in Australia. And second generation make up about a quarter of the population. So it just shows you how diverse a lot of the capital cities are. So if we look at migrants, where do they live within Australia? Well, they're distributed all over. And you can see that the largest single group reside in New South Wales. So New South Wales has just over 2 million of the overseas born living within that state and territory. New South Wales and Victoria have similar concentrations of the overseas born, so about 28% of the population in each of those states is overseas born. But if you just head over to WA and have a look there, you'll see that that's the state with the highest proportional concentration of overseas born people at 32%, and that's up from 31% 5 years ago. Have a look at Tasmania, which Duncan is fond of doing because Duncan's from Tasmania, and we can see that the overseas born just make up 12% of Tasmania's population. So this slide here is giving you a 50-year perspective of some of the key overseas birthplace groups to the Australian population, and we'll go down and we'll have a look at a few geographies shortly after this one. So 50 years ago, in 1966, Australia's overseas born population made just up 18% of Australia's population. And you can see the largest single group by birthplace, outside of Australia of course, was England. You'll see that Italy was pretty dominant as well. You can see that New Zealand is featuring there. But India and China together made up roughly about 1% of migrants 50 years ago. So if you follow the lines down, you can see that obviously English migrants are still arriving, but proportionally they make up a much smaller share of the pie now. And what we've seen is an increase in those from China and India in the 2016 population. We've also seen New Zealand increase, and the older migrant groups such as Italy, people from Italy, they've decreased in proportional size. So this is the Melbourne picture over a similar period. And it's a little bit different from the Australia picture. Yeah, sure, we've got England there as a key contributor, but Greece and Italy really feature 50 years ago in the share of the overseas born population in Melbourne. And you can see that China and India and the Philippines make up very low proportions 50 years ago. So let's have a look at the right-hand side of the slide, and you can see that quite clearly in 2016 the China-born and the India-born now make up the key migrant groups living in Melbourne. You'll see that the Philippines is on the rise as well, but those three key European groups proportionally are smaller, a smaller contributor to the population. So this is having a look at the top 10 countries of birth in Victoria. And we've taken the Australia born out of this equation because there's so many born in Australia that it would sort of compress these bars. In fact, 64.9% of the population of Victoria was actually born in Australia. So this is focusing on the overseas countries of birth. And it's showing you in orange the 2011 figures, and then in blue the 2016 figures. So you'll see that for the England born there's actually been very little change. There's been a slight decrease in terms of how many England born people there are in Victoria in the 5 years. But if you have a look at India and China, you'll see that there's been quite large growth there. In fact, the India born people in the population have grown by 52% in number. And for China, it's approaching 72% increase in the 5 years. So you can see increases in the number of New Zealand born, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Philippines, Malaysia, and you can see small decreases in the number born in Italy and in Greece. So if we have a look at the top 10 countries of birth within Melbourne on the left-hand side, and then in the rest of Victoria on the other, you'll perhaps remember back to one of Duncan's age-sex pyramids, which looked at the age profile of Melbourne versus the rest of Victoria, and the rest of Victoria has an older age profile than Melbourne, because Melbourne has a lot of migrants coming in. They tend to be younger. So if you have a look at Melbourne, you'll see that in 2016, just under 60% of the Melbourne population was born in Australia, compared to just over 80% of people living in the rest of Victoria. So quite a different pattern there. What you'll also see in Melbourne is the prominence of Asian countries in terms of the top 10 countries of birth. So we've got India, China, Vietnam, Sri Lanka and Malaysia. Whereas in the rest of Victoria, what you're seeing outside the Australia born is the prominence of European countries as overseas countries of birth. So we've got England there, we've got the Netherlands, we've got Italy, we've got Germany and we've got Scotland. So it's quite a different mix in terms of the capital city and the balance of state. So this is just having a look now, pulling back to the Australian picture again, and having a look at what's happened over the last decade in terms of what our recent arrival mix looks like. And the top 10, we've got 5 here, but the top 10 overseas countries of birth for recent arrivals in the last decade all are from Asia, with the exception of England, New Zealand and South Africa. So Indian born arrivals make up almost 14% of overseas migrants in the last 10 years, closely followed by China, then by England, New Zealand and the Philippines. So the face of our immigration program has changed considerably in the last 10 years, and the likes of Melbourne and Sydney are receiving a lot of these migrants, and the face of Melbourne and Sydney is changing considerably. So Duncan isn't the only one who can pull an odd age-sex pyramid out of the woodwork, and I think this is the best of the lot, actually. And this illustrates quite nicely how diverse the overseas born are. So we have a lot of European born migrants, so it might be English, it might be Scottish, it might be German, from the Netherlands, Greek, Italy. Those big waves of migration from Europe happened after the Second World War and went through 50s and 60s and early 70s. So a lot of people who came in then have now aged considerably. And you can see those in the blue bars. And if that's not nearly a coffin shape, I don't know what is. It's just really striking that the largest of those age groups is 65 to 69. So it's a much older population. Let's have a look at the Asian born. So they're more recent migrants, because of the programs in which the migrants come in under either to study or to work. That means that they're in the young adult stage and age group. So if we look at the Asian born, you'll see that the dominant age group there is about 30 to 34. So a young migrant population and an older migrant population. So Ancestry gives us another clue about cultural groupings within Australia, and it goes beyond country of birth and language. It just gives an attachment, an indication of ancestry to which Australians feel fairly attached. English, Irish, Scottish, Australian are all up there, so still very European outside of Australia, but Chinese is in there as well. And if you look at particular geographies such as Melbourne and Sydney, you would see Asian ancestries coming in more strongly. And what's interesting is having a look at how people from first, second and third generations change in terms of the reporting of ancestry. We've noticed 10 ancestries in the 2016 census that have over 5,000 responses, so that's like a minimum benchmark, that have grown particularly quickly this census. So we've got the Chin, who are a group related to Myanmar. We've got the Punjabi group, and we've also got the Hazara group. All of those groups have grown by well over 150%. So another fabulous thing that the census tells us about diverse Australia is the language spoken at home. And of course, the majority of people speak English only at home. And the remaining people, it isn't that they don't speak English, it's that they speak other things as well at home. So that's the distinction that we have here. So more than a fifth of Australians have said that they speak a language other than English, but English too at home. So following on from English, Mandarin is the most common language, followed by Arabic, Vietnamese and Cantonese. We also ask people who speak a language other than English how well they actually speak English, and we find out whether they speak it very well, not well at all, or not at all. And given the diversity that we have within our language mix within Australia, it's perhaps surprising that just 3.5% of the Australian population don't speak English or don't speak it well. So this is looking at the Melbourne situation, and it's looking at it over a 10-year period, so 2006 and 2016. And you can see the impact of migration here, I think, quite clearly. So in 2006, 68% of Melbourne households spoke English only. In 2016, that's reduced to 60.4%. So we've seen some big increases in Mandarin. We've seen increases in most of the Asian languages. Cantonese has remained fairly stable. But we've seen a decline in the proportion of the population speaking Greek and Italian. I will just point to Punjabi, which has seen quite a considerable increase there, up from 0.2 to 1.2% of the population. So something else we can do with English proficiency, which I referred to just a minute ago, is to start looking at it by age and particular geographic areas and by particular kinds of language speakers. And this is really useful if you are trying to provide social services, community services, aged care services in particular geographic areas. And this is a picture from Melbourne, and this is showing you by various age groups what proportion of that age group either don't speak English at all, or they say they don't speak it well. So Greater Melbourne is in blue and Australia is in orange. And it's quite surprised me that when I was looking at the 80 years and over in Melbourne, 17% of people in that age group said they didn't speak English well, or they didn't speak it at all. And a similarly high proportion as well in the 70 to 79 year age groups, almost 12% there. So that means if you are working in an area that you're trying to provide culturally aware services for older people, you really need to take this kind of information into account. And you can see for the younger age groups, it's far, far smaller. So what we did, we delved down into a little bit more into that data to have a look at how many people in Melbourne actually said they had very limited English. And it was just over 55,000 people. and they're over the age of 70. So what are the languages that they speak at home? Well, the top 5 languages are Greek and Italian, and that reflects some of the older migrants, the older long-term migrants that live within Melbourne. Then by Mandarin, Cantonese and Vietnamese. And if I go down the top 10, it also includes Russian, Macedonian, Croatian and Spanish. So these are clearly some of our older migrants who've come into Australia, and some of them have never picked up a lot of English. Okay, so this is something that has actually grabbed a lot of attention in this release, and we've taken a fairly long perspective in having a look at this because it really shows some dramatic changes over 50 years. So if you look back to 1966, 50 years ago more or less, you'll see that almost 90% of Australians said they were affiliated with a Christian religion. Less than 1% said they had a religion other than Christianity, and less than 1% said they had no religion. So if we fast forward to 2016, that picture has changed remarkably. And in 2016, just over half of Australians said they had an affiliation with a Christian religion. 8.2% said they had a religion other than Christianity, and 30% said they had no religion. When you have a look at this by age, there's some clear patterns that actually stick out. And one of them is when you look at the 18 to 34-year age group. You'll see that people in that age group are as likely to report no religion as they are a Christian religion. Also, they're more likely to report a religion other than Christianity. So that latter fact partly, I think, reflects the migrant population. But if you look at the other end of the age spectrum, you'll see that for older people, they are much more likely to report a Christian religion. So 70% of 65-year-olds and over report having a Christian religion. The under 18s pattern is very similar to the 35 to 49, and that's probably because the parents are in the 35 to 49-year age group, filling in a census form on behalf of the family and responding on behalf of children. So if we have a look at this next slide, it shows you what's happening in Australia with particular denominations, and also what's happening in Melbourne as well. So I did point out that in 2016, just over half of Australians said they had a affiliation to a Christian religion. In Melbourne, it's less than half, so 46.2%. Catholics and Anglicans in Australia are the only two religious denominations where there are well over 1 million people reporting they're affiliated with those religions. All the other religions are much, much smaller. So Melbourne has a slight overrepresentation of people reporting Catholicism compared to Australia. Less likely to report being an Anglican religion, but if you have a look at Eastern Orthodox, you'll see that's quite highly represented in Melbourne compared to Australia as a whole, and that represents your historical pattern of migration coming in. So the other thing to look at is what happens to religions other than Christianity, and compare that to Australia and to Melbourne. So Melbourne, it's 8.2% of the population, Australia, sorry, and in Melbourne, 13.2% of the population have a religion other than Christianity. So what's featuring large is Islam at 4.2% of Melbourne's population, compared to 2.6% of Australia's. You've got Buddhism quite high up there as well, Hinduism, Sikhism and Judaism as well. And in Melbourne, people are more likely to report, slightly more likely to report no religion at 31.5%. So just having a look, we've had a look at a range of cultural diversity indicators over the past few minutes, and what we thought we'd do, we'd just drill down into a suburb or two now, just to see how that varies. So this is a map showing you the countries of birth by suburb, and it's across Melbourne. Now, some of the colours are a bit hard to differentiate, but basically the darker green that's standing out is the India-born. The bright red colours are the China-born. The grey all around is England-born. Because we've taken Australians out of here, we just want to show the other countries of birth here. You can see Sri Lanka in a medium green. We've got Iraq on there, Afghanistan, etc. So you can see that particular birthplace groups are often concentrated in particular areas. So no doubt you're all having a look at that and seeing where you live and where it all features. In Canberra, where we live, we've got a similar map. And in Canberra, it really matters whether you are north of the lake or you're south of the lake. In Canberra, the China-born live north of the lake, the India-born live south of the lake. And it's really interesting, the red and the green. So if we have a look at the Melbourne suburbs with the highest proportion of the overseas born, there's a few that stand out. And one of them is Greater Dandenong, and about 57% of the population counted in the census in Greater Dandenong are born overseas. So let's go in and pull together some of those indicators we've had a look at and see what it tells us about Greater Dandenong. So the top 5 countries of birth outside of the Australian born are Vietnam, India, Cambodia, Sri Lanka and Afghanistan. So a bit of a different mix in Greater Dandenong than you might see represented in the top 5 Melbourne ones. That's also reflected in the looking at the languages spoken at home other than English. So Vietnamese again is up there, Khmer, Punjabi, Mandarin and Cantonese. And if we have a look at religious affiliation, you can see it's quite a different picture here in Greater Dandenong compared to the one that we've been looking at previously. So no religion, which at the Australia level is 30.1%, in Greater Dandenong is just 16.9%. Catholic is up there. Buddhism is 14.8% compared to 2.4% nationally, and Islam is high as well. So that just gives you a flavour of, we can present data at the Australia level, we can present it at the state level, we can present it at the capital city level, but each suburb that you go into just tells its own story. And you could pick a town, a small area out in, northern Victoria, that would tell you a different picture again. So that's the beauty of the census, really. It does allow you to dive down and really reveal the diversity that we have across Australia. So now I'll hand over to Duncan.
Thanks, Sue. So we didn't mention earlier, there is an exam at the end. We'll be circulating papers out. We expect you to be able to draw an age pyramid. Sue's talked about some real fast-changing parts of Australia, whereas families and households in Australia actually haven't changed that much over the last 5 years. So we counted some 6.1 million families in the census, and what we found was, like last census, that the most common family structure is to have a couple with children, with some 45% of families having that structure. That has decreased. If we look back over the last 25 years, it's decreased by about 9 percentage points. 6 percentage points have gone to the couples of no children. So that's a combination of people who've never had children or people who are empty nesters, the children have moved out from home, and about 3 percentage point increase in the number of single parent families across Australia. And what you can see there is we found in single parent families, whilst there was a small increase in the number of male single parent families over the last 5 years, it's still a lot more common to be a female single parent family. in Melbourne, in Greater Melbourne, it's some 48.5% of families are couple families with children. So it's actually a higher proportion of families have children. One family type or relationship type which has changed considerably over the last 5 years, though, is the number of people who reported to being in a same-sex couple. And so what you can see here is that there's slightly more male same-sex couples in Australia than female same-sex couples, so 51% versus 49% in 2016. But what we saw across Australia was some 39% increase in the number of same-sex couples over the last 5 years. And the number of same-sex couples since we started collecting data on same-sex couples in 1996 has increased by over 4 times, so quadrupled in the last 20 years. As this slide shows, that same-sex couples are a proportion of all couples in each state and territory. And what you can see there is that there's been an increase in every state and territory. In the ACT, it's the most common and highest proportion of couples are same-sex couples, with some 1.4% and of couples in the ACT reporting it as same-sex couples, with New South Wales second and Victoria in the third most highest proportion. What we've also seen in this census is an increase in the number of people in lone person households. So over 2 million people now live in a household in Australia, with 1.1 million of these 2 million people were women and 0.9 million were men. And so this is 8.7% of Australians are living by themselves. What you can see here is a significant increase in the number of females living alone as the age groups move along the bottom there. And if we line this up with marriage age status, you can see 2 waves here. You can see a wave of divorces and separations, then you can see a wave, the later and bigger wave is people which are widowed as you go into the older group. And so if you look at the peak age group, so 75 and over and 85, between 75 and 89, it's more than a third of women in Australia are living alone. And you can actually see that peak point there is actually up around 40% of women in the 85 to 89-year-old age group are living alone. And so another perspective of our population and as it ages is a need for assistance. So the census asks questions about a need for assistance, and so asks about it's really about our core needs. So do you need help with daily activities? Do you need help with assistance? Sort of a real sort of profound or severe disability is what it represents. And what you can see here is that there's a significant increase as people get older. And so really starting to climb from that 70 to 74 age gap, but then a significant climb from the 85 age onwards. What we did see this census was a lower proportion of older people who needed assistance. So there seems to be a bit of a living healthier older, but a significant increase in the number of young people all requiring assistance. So you can see that little lump there in the blue line between 0 to 14 and 10 to 14. So the combination of that increase and the ageing population means that now some 5% of the Australian population have indicated that they need assistance in their daily life. So who provides this assistance? Well, another really important picture that a census provides is a picture of people who provide unpaid care in Australia. And so some 2.1 million Australians provided some level of unpaid care within the last 2 weeks before the census. About 2/3 of this group were female and about 1/3 were male. And the peak age groups here are between 50 and 74. And so in some of these age groups, you can see that more than 1 in every 5 women are providing unpaid care to someone who's experiencing a disability or a long-term health condition and requires care. And these, as you know, are still in our working age kind of years. So there is once we release in October our labour force picture, it'll be interesting to see how these sort of add together to give a picture of a load on parts of our population. we also get this picture in a census of people who provide unpaid care for children other than their own. And so with some 1.5 million Australians providing unpaid care for children that weren't their own. And really this is a great grandparent slide. So a bit of a shout out to my parents. They've provided a bit of unpaid care in their time for my children. And so what you can see here is that this significant increase from 50 to 54, it starts climbing up, and then a really big group from 60, 64 and 65 to 69. Whilst you can see the orange bars, they're standing out boldly above the blue bars. What you can see is in the 65 to 69-year-olds, for some 14% of all men in that age group are providing some unpaid care. So grandfathers are doing a bit in that age range as well. So a nice picture there. I always have to be careful when I talk about this slide, or I'll get myself in trouble. I'd like to think that Census Week wasn't an atypical week for me in terms of being able to do my share of paid domestic work. But what you can see clearly in this picture is that in terms of the unpaid domestic work around the home, females are still doing a more significant share than males, particularly as you look at the larger amounts of unpaid domestic work per week. So we've got 13% of women and are doing 15 to 29 hours of unpaid work every week, compared to 5.5% of men. And 21% of men are getting away with doing no unpaid work compared to 14.5% of women. So that's a little bit of a picture of some of the, I guess, other dimensions of a census around families, households and unpaid care. In October, we release our data on occupation, industry, qualifications and paid work. And so that really sort of complements this kind of picture. So I'll tag Sue back in.
So I haven't worked out how you get away with doing no hours of domestic work. So when somebody does work that out, please tell me. So we're going to move on to some dimensions now that have also been picked up in the media, and this is to do with income and it's to do with housing costs. And housing costs, of course, are really is a really pressing concern for a lot of people in Australia today. So before we get onto those, let's have a look at how our median personal incomes vary across Australia. So in 2016, the median personal income, now we do collect family and we do collect household income, but this is just personal income for an individual. Across Australia, it was $662 a week. Now, if you have a look at the ACT, you'll see the ACT clearly are the highest income people there, including some in this room, no doubt. Not me. $998 a week. Closely followed by two of our mining states and territories, WA and the Northern Territory as well. So it's clearly public service and dare I say academia in this room? I don't know. We've got 4 or 5 universities in the ACT, and I think that all adds up. Victoria, you can see, is slightly below the national median level at 644. But the two that really stand out, because they're much lower, are South Australia and Tasmania. They're considerably lower than everywhere else. But one of the things to realise about those two states is they are a much older population. They have a lot of retirees in that population. And when we're talking about income here, it's not just wages and salaries, it's pensions, it's superannuation, it's benefits. So if we look at tenure type, this is information about the houses or apartments that people live in. This is information about people's homes. And we've got a 25-year picture for Melbourne and for Australia. So 25 years ago, the most common tenure type, both in Melbourne and at the Australia level, was for homes to be owned outright. And that was about 41% in Melbourne, 41% in Australia. That's dropped considerably now. And in 2016, you can see it's down to 30.4% in Melbourne and 31% in Australia. So what's moved up the rankings then? So what we can see is that homes that are owned with a mortgage or being bought have clearly become more prominent. In Melbourne, they represented 31% of dwellings 25 years ago. That was higher than the Australia picture at that time. But in 2016, it's now 36%. Now, to some extent, you might expect that, because what we've seen is a lot of younger migrants coming in to the population. It's a younger population, so they're not going to be necessarily in a position of being able to own a home outright. A lot of them, if the students are going to be renting, and some who will stay here, will be buying a home with a mortgage. So moving on to having a look at the homes that are rented, that picture's changed over the last 25 years as well. And so in Melbourne 25 years ago, almost 24% of homes were rented, but now it's 30%. And a similar picture in Australia. Interestingly enough, the move to rental accommodation has actually been faster in Melbourne. You've had a bigger move there compared to the Australia picture. So the next few slides are going to have a look at housing costs. And for many people, that's a really pressing concern. Either how do you manage your mortgage repayments, or how do you manage to pay rent out of your income? So this is showing the median mortgage repayments in dollars per month. And this is for capital cities, and then in the grey is Australia. So the figure for Australia is 1,755. So if we have a look at where are the highest mortgage repayments, you can see that Darwin's standing out there. That's the highest costs. $2,200 a month is the median mortgage in Darwin. Sydney follows second, Canberra follows third, and Perth is fourth. Melbourne, your median mortgage repayments are $1,800 a month. So I know you're doing all your calculations now to see where you fit in terms of that. And you look at some of these figures and, you know people who are paying far more than that or far less, but these are medians. So what we can also do with the census, because we collect information on people's incomes, you can work out how much of their income people are paying on their mortgage and on their rent. So this green line here and these dots is telling you what proportion of households in each capital city are paying more than 30% of their income, their household income, on their mortgage. And you can see that Perth really stands out there. You read the bar, the axis on the right hand side, which gives you the percentage. So in Perth, I think it's 9%, just over 9% of households in Perth are under some form of mortgage stress. Followed by Sydney and Melbourne. But not everybody is buying a house, and not everybody owns a house outright. So let's have a look at what's happening in the rental market. And this shows you, for the capital cities in Australia, how much rent per week, and this is median costs again, people are paying on their rent. So if we have a look, there is one that clearly sort of stands out. There's two that clearly stand out, Sydney and Darwin, in terms of the cost of renting in those cities. So the Australia level, the median is $335 a week. In Sydney, it's $440. In Darwin, it's $420. Melbourne's median is $350. And again, you will know people who are paying much more than that, but this is a median. But what we're seeing in the census data is that rental stress there's far more of it than there is of the mortgage stress at the moment. And one of the reasons for that is that interest rates have gone down for people paying the mortgage. Yes, house prices have gone up, but it's sort of balanced each other out. But what's happening in the rental market is that in nearly all the capital cities, at least 1 in 10 households is spending more than 30% of their income on rent. And if you have a look at Sydney, it's 14% of Sydney households are paying more than 30% of their income on rent. Interestingly enough, look at Hobart. Hobart actually has quite low rental costs. But if you think back to the income slide, they've got very low incomes as well. So while what they're paying out might be quite low, as a proportion of their income, it's actually quite high. So over 10% of households in Hobart are under rental stress. So let's have a look at the picture in Victoria in a little bit more detail. And this is picking out a number of Victorian suburbs in which we've identified quite high proportions of households paying more than 30% of the household income on rent. And then there's also a column just saying how much that rent is. Now, you will know these suburbs far better than I, so you'll know the mix of people who are living in these suburbs. So some of them will be dominated, no doubt, by students who have quite a low income and then having to pay quite high rents. But Carlton's clearly a standout. So it's almost 55% of households in Carlton are paying more than 30% of the household income on rent. If you look, Victoria, the Victorian proportion is 10.4. So all of these suburbs listed here are well above the Victorian average. If we have a look at where mortgage stress is occurring in Victoria, it's a different pattern again. So it's not in the city centre, it tends to be out in the suburbs. And it's on the suburban fringe for some of it. So a lot of these will be people who are buying a house for the first time maybe, and who have recently bought a house, and they're probably mortgaged up to the max in order to try and get into that housing market. So there's places like Wallet, Plumpton, Roxburgh Park. More than 20% of households within those suburbs are paying more than 30% of their income on their mortgage. And the column on the right just gives you an indication of what the median mortgage payments are. And of course, because it's a median, there'll be some people in there paying much less, some people paying much more. All right, so then we've just given you some slivers of what the data tells you. There's so much more you can have a look at in census data. And it's the one data set that covers all of Australia and everybody in it. So I know you're all dying to ask how you can get your hands on this incredible data. And Duncan is the man to tell you.
Thanks, Sue. One of the great things about the work that the ABS does in the census is that nearly all of it's free. Your seminar today was free, and the data's available online and for free. So we try and package the data up into a range of different ways to make sure that it's accessible to no matter what level you come at, how geeky you are around the data. So we've got it's sort of entry-level kinds of articles, stories, summaries, like analytical products, quick stats, which are easy web summaries, community profiles, which get you into Excel and playing around with a spreadsheet, through to sort of some of our more complex products, data packs and table builder. So our analytical products, our data summaries, there's a few of them pictured up on the screen here. They're designed to be really easy to read, really easy to digest. So jump on abs.gov.au and you can get in and have a look at some infographics about the data. You can look at little articles we put together. And we've actually got a program of articles planned over the next 12 months. So as we get an opportunity to look at different areas, we'll bring out our specific articles exploring the data, how Australia's changed in 2016 in a little bit more detail in each of those areas. On the ABS website, there's a big button at the top which says Census. If you click on that, it'll take you to this page, which is a bit of a navigator. There's a search box on this page, and that's a really great spot to start. And so that's how most of us find things on the web these days, is searching. And so to go to the quick stats search there, you can type in pretty much any geography in Australia and you'll be able to bring up a free little quick stats profile of that geography. There's some 80,000 geographies available there for you to have a look at. From this single page here, you can navigate to any of those products I mentioned down the middle column, and down in the bottom left-hand corner, the Census Stories picture there is where our most accessible products are. So this is what a quick stats looks like. The most important thing when you bring up any of our products, like a quick stats, is first to have a bit of a look at the map there. So this is the Australian Capital Territory, and because there's lots of different ways of thinking about geography, some people think that North Melbourne includes this much, some people think it doesn't include that much. Have a look at the map first to make sure that this is the area that you're actually looking at. So unfortunately we had I won't dob them in, but a regional Victorian town jumped on my radio earlier in the week and said that the census is wrong, our population's dropped by 20%. But in fact, they'd looked at two different geographies between the two censuses and their population had actually gone up in the census. So have a look at your geographies in order to understand and what area you're looking at. And so quick stats will give you a whole lot of it, the high-level findings for any particular area, but the top few countries of birth, the top few languages spoken, proportion of people in each sort of broad age groups. And so it allows you to sort of get some of that high-level kind of picture and gives you some comparisons between an area, a state, the nation, or if you're looking at a state level, can give you comparisons between one census and the previous. And we've actually got quick stats up there for the last 4 censuses, so you can look back through an area as it changes over time. If a little bit of data is not enough for you, and then jump into the community profile. So the community profiles, there's a few different community profiles: a general profile, an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's profile, which just focuses on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within an area, and a time series profile, which brings together the last few censuses for comparison. So each of these are a big spreadsheet which give you a lot more detail on every topic area. So rather than the top 5 countries of birth, you'll get 35 countries of birth. You'll get a lot more sort of detail and picture in the community profiles. And so you can obviously download those spreadsheets and play around with them on your own computer. Table builders, where we have a whole lot of fun. So table builders where you say, well, the ABS doesn't know what table I want, I'll go and make my table myself. And so it's a bit like, if anyone's played with Excel and seen a pivot table, it's a bit like building a pivot table. You drag whatever you want into the column headings, whatever you want into the row headings, click go, and it'll build that data up for you. And you can build it up on any kind of geography you want. So there's a couple of different table builder products. What we've done this census is we've introduced guest access to Table Builder. So in previous censuses you had to register. You could register for a free product. This time you can just go along, hit the guest button, and you jump straight in there. We served up on the day that Table Builder was released last Tuesday 1.6 billion cells of information. So it's certainly a popular product that we have. So we've released most census data over the last couple of weeks. We're releasing in October the rest of the information which has been provided on the census form. So employment, qualifications, internal migration, so where people have moved from 1 year ago or 5 years ago. Also pictures of how people travelled to work. So those topics are more complex, they take us longer to sort of process, and so we get out what data we can straight away and we get those out in October. And then from December and into next year, we've got a range of other exciting products coming. So in December, we'll have a census longitudinal data set. So it's the second time we've released that. So it has a time series now of 3 censuses, so 2006, 2011, 2016, where you can actually look at groups of a population and how they've changed over time. So if someone's unemployed in 2016, were they employed in 2006? And understand a little bit more about changes and flows in a population rather than just a snapshot at a point in time. We also release next year the socioeconomic index for areas, our homelessness estimates, and also our census microdata products. So that's the end of our quick summary. We've got a bit of time now for questions. Then we've also got some of my colleagues over here who have their computers ready to go, and they're very happy and willing to give you sort of demos of things, show you how to find things, how to navigate around things. Also, after a few minutes, after questions are done, and if people really want to see Table Builder in action, just hang about and we might put something up on the screen for that. But thank you very much for your attention. Is there any questions? Okay. I think, do we only have one microphone, I think? So I'll do a sort of roving kind of Ellen job.
I was interested in that slide that had males providing more care towards the end of, in our autumn years, and that surprised me. I work in community services, so could you shed some light on that? It was in there, I think, 70 or 80 plus. Yes. Yeah.
I think that's just something that we've seen previously as well, is that we've seen in previous censuses that those males who do manage to survive till older years are often in quite good shape to be able to provide care for their wives. Up until that point, though, it's clearly females who are the dominant care provider. Yep.
Thanks. Just quite a bit of information in religion in there, which is really interesting, but you missed the one thing that everyone wants to know, which is how many people put their religion as Jedi?
Look, it's a state secret.
It's interesting that the ABS has actually tweeted or put out some sort of media thing about that every census until now.
We have our media guys at the back, and I'm not sure if they've pressed the button to send that tweet out yet, but it'll be coming soon.
Okay.
All I'll say is that the Australian population has now moved further into the Star Wars Federation. We have Jedi, we have Sith Lords, and quite a few others as well. So, watch this space.
Thank you.
Hi, so in regards to the data packs that are being released, I believe tomorrow, for a start, do you have to pay for those, and how do you get your hands on them? Like, do you have to put in a request, or can they just be downloaded easily from the ABS?
I'm getting nods, and so you don't have to pay for them. That was the shake of the head, and the nod is, Duncan.
You can just download them from a website.
It's so easy.
So data packs are massive, big files with sort of the aggregated data at a small area level, which allows you to feed them into your own systems.
Yeah, so a lot of users of data packs are actually commercial users who need big downloads to feed into their systems. So, next week.
Yeah. Just a question on accuracy. You mentioned when you were talking about the religious responses that in some cases the parents may have filled those in. So has there been any post-enumeration work done to see to what extent those results, particularly for the new migrants, are accurate or aspirational?
Well, I did make that point for the religion question, but that's actually true of all questions. And just think back to how you and or your family filled in the form themselves. Families do it in different ways, households do it in different ways. So I know when my husband did it, I did my bit and then he did his bit. But in previous years, I've just done it on behalf of the family. And so that's the census. It's self-enumeration and it's up to a household to determine how they're going to answer it. So yes, they will have answered that for the question on religion in that way, but similarly they will have answered other things as well. So we think it's a fair representation. I think it's probably true up until a certain point that children follow or attend church or do whatever that the parents do. But, it's pretty clear from that slide what's happening to the 18 to 34-year age group as well.
I suppose a couple of other data quality issues. You mentioned at the beginning, I think the under-remuneration was 1%. Now, obviously, historically, that's been higher for Indigenous populations than for regional populations. Do you know whether that has also got better with the current census and previous ones? Or?
Well, with the Indigenous count, that is broadly the same this time as it was last time. So in 2011, it was 17.2%. This time it's 17.5%. So the standard error, it's broadly the same. So that undercount remains the same. The regional areas we haven't, our demography and post-enumeration colleagues actually haven't delivered the detailed data yet. That's somewhat later in the year. But one really good news story, another good news story from this census, in addition to the reduced net undercount overall, is that we saw substantial drops in net undercount for the overseas born. So last time, the China-born and the India-born, it was nearly 15% undercount. This time it's dropped substantially down to say 6 or 7%. And in fact, the India and China-born really went online in a big way. So, nearly 90%, I think, was it for the China-born? And 85 for the India-born, So, we've still got issues, as we do every census, that we'll have to look at next time. And, Indigenous enumeration is one of those. But we've actually made some real gains this time. And Duncan did mention at the beginning, and I was in charge of data assurance, so I had a really close look at the data quality. And it's so true that the more online responses you get, the better they are. People just answer better, they sequence through the form better. We have much lower item non-response. More people answer the questions. So the fact that that's gone up to over 63% this time just means automatically we've made gains there. And our overseas born population seems to really come to the party with it as well, which is good. Yeah.
Not very good MC. I didn't see who put their hand up first.
God.
Just a couple of questions I had from the slides. So the one about unpaid domestic work. So did that include childcare?
No. There's a separate slide on caring for children, unpaid care for children, and that can be your own children or somebody else's children.
Okay.
So now unpaid work is things like domestic work, and it can be gardening and all sorts of things.
Okay. It seemed like some of them, it was like it was a lot of hours to spend cleaning or whatever. So I thought they must have kids or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other one was the one about the age groups of people who don't speak English.
Yeah.
So the 0 to 9, does that include children that don't speak at all? Because they're babies?
Oh, yeah. A lot of that will be newly arrived migrants, so the kids who've arrived recently and they didn't speak English very well. But of course, once they get into school and get into programs, that changes fairly rapidly.
Okay.
The whole point of that slide is just to show that people at school and people in the workforce, they really have to get to grips with the English language, and indeed, if you're a migrant, of course, you've got to pass particular tests now, etc. But I think it was surprising to me that you can have people who've lived here for a long time who will have worked, who will have contributed. Maybe it was in a family business or in a kind of an enterprise in which their English skills weren't so important. But now you've got this large group of people who are in the older age groups. And I know there was a discussion on Life Matters yesterday on Radio National just about this as well, how the challenge of providing culturally appropriate services to an older population who either don't speak English very well, or in some cases as well, revert back to their original language when they get older anyway. So that was the point of that slide. Yeah.
I'm sorry to butt in, but I'm just here. I have a question about the domestic work as well. I imagine with that particular question, some people might be inclined to over-report or under-report. Someone might like cooking and might under-report the number of hours that they do in the census. How do you control for that at all?
No, it is what it is, and it is what people report. It's self-enumerated. It's not an interview. You know, if you want to get into the depths of that, you have to run a far more in-depth, sophisticated survey. We do one periodically called the Time Use Survey, in which the poor respondents have to fill in a diary over a period, basically listing everything they do, including domestic work, you know. But the interesting thing about domestic work, and I do take your point, how can anybody spend quite as long as some people were on domestic work? But we've only given you a glimpse of the entire picture today, because really what you have to do is fit that together with people and their employment situation, and the caring situation and caring for children, and then see how that all comes out in the wash, because usually you find particular groups in the population picking up more of one thing than the other. So we've just got glimpses into that at the moment.
What you do have as well is consistency of a question between the last few censuses, so you can still sort of compare it over time. Even though there's always going to be some level of over-reporting, some level of under-reporting, but it's a consistent sort of series, so you can see how it's changing. We might just take one more question, and because I know that we could keep going being all afternoon, and I want to give people a chance to sort of get down to see data analysts. But Sue and I'll still be around down the front, so if people want to come down and ask us questions, we're very happy to answer them. But I've got one question just here. I've managed to dodge all the questions here, Sue. I'm doing a great job, aren't I?
So far. Bit like domestic work.
Good afternoon. Thanks for a great presentation to both of you. I was just focused on the first generation Australians, the migrants. I was wondering if the census data captures their method of entry into Australia, whether they're humanitarian or students or permanent residents, etc.
Great question. No, we don't. But what the ABS did after the last census, and what the ABS will be doing after this census as well, is we can get a file of information from the Department of Immigration. It's without name and address, so we use probabilistic linking. But basically what you can then do is get that visa information from the Department of Immigration and attach it to the census file. And that gives you some fabulous insights then into the educational and employment outcomes of migrants as well. So that information is publicly available, and I'm not
available as a data set and table builder?
Yes, yeah. So it's a really great resource to have a look at. Yeah.
So it won't be out until early next year. So the previous census data set's up there, and it had some fascinating insights. I gave a presentation in Melbourne last year on where humanitarian migrants had settled versus skilled migrants in Melbourne, and how that the language development was different between the groups. And one of the insights was that people who arrived with humanitarian visas were more likely to start their own businesses than people who arrived in any other visa class. So, but I'm sorry to cut off for questions. I'd love to keep answering them, or Sue would. So thank you very much for coming along. Please come down if you want to talk about anything. So we've got some data analysts here. They'll be setting up on the tables.
Yeah, data analysts there.
So I'll be able to help you with any of your inquiries. So thank you.
Good.